All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Phi Kappa Phi Student Vice President Speaker Series. My name is Liana Van Wozik, and I'm one of the Student Vice Presidents here at Phi Kappa Phi. I'm doing my master's degree at Florida Tech. We're so excited to host Captain Wendy Lawrence here tonight. It's such an honor to have her come and speak with us. It's really meaningful to me because I used to love going to the Kennedy Space Center when I was a kid and doing all the tours, and I also go to university right on the Space Coast, so love watching the rocket launches and being part of the space community. I also loved being able to go and hear astronaut talks as a kid and hear stories of people like Captain Lawrence talking about how they drank water in space or like played in zero gravity, but I feel like now with time, that awe of space has turned into like a deep respect for understanding what it takes to be somebody in this industry, the complexity of the training they go through, like the persistence and accomplishment. It's really quite remarkable, and I think Captain Lawrence is a perfect example of this. She's shown us what it's like to push the boundaries of what's really possible, and we're so excited to hear her story. Our other co-host here tonight, Ruth Nichols, turn the show over to you and you can share some words before we get started.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Ruth Nichols. I've been in Phi Kappa Phi since about 2022, and I was on the board from 2022 to 2024 as the undergrad student rep, and I was also on the Council of Students. I was a student vice president at Florida Tech studying astrobiology and mathematical sciences, so space is very near and dear to my heart as well. Um, I'm currently a Schwarzman Scholar applying for PhD programs, and I first met Wendy Lawrence through the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation because I was an astronaut scholar at Florida Tech and got to meet her through some events hosted by them. And it was a pleasure to meet her then, and it's a pleasure to co-host her through Phi Kappa Phi as well. So before we begin, I will give her an introduction. Captain Wendy Lawrence graduated from the Naval Academy in 1981 and earned her Wings of Gold in 1982. As a Navy helicopter pilot, she made several shipboard deployments to the North Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and Kenya. While stationed at Helicopter Combat Support Squadron 6, she was one of the first two female helicopter pilots to make a long deployment to the Indian Ocean as part of a carrier battle group. After earning a master's degree in ocean engineering from MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, Lawrence was selected as an astronaut in 1992 and worked at NASA for 14 years. Her technical assignments include serving as the NASA Director of Operations at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, Russia, and as the Astronaut Office Representative to the ISS Program for Crew Training, Operations, and Support. A veteran of 4 shuttle missions, she has logged over 50 days in space. Her last flight was the first shuttle return to flight mission following the loss of the orbiter Columbia and her crew. This flight evaluated new procedures and protocols for shuttle inspection and repair. Currently, Captain Lawrence works part-time at Space Camp and Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, informing the public about NASA spaceflight programs and participating in STEM education programs. So thank you again. This is a privilege to have you, and the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth and Leanna. It is a pleasure to be here. Long, long ago, when I was in the Naval Academy, I was inducted into the Phi Kappa Phi chapter there. So, organization has a fond spot in my heart. And yes, I will do my best to make sure there's time for questions at the end. And I'm just generally going to give you a quick version of my journey to become an astronaut, as I like to call it, my journey to the stars, and then give you a little bit of insight into training you go through and some of the experiences I had during my 4 missions on board various space shuttles. So with that, I will share my screen and get us launched into the presentation. Just a quick note, when there truly are billions and billions and billions of stars, and I think this is one of the best pictures I've seen that shows you what it's like when we look out the window. No, it's not easy to find the constellation. It is absolutely a stunning view. And I like looking at out the window at night just as much as I like looking out the window during the day. Sometimes I feel guilty. I feel like my astronaut story should be unique, compelling. But when you talk to astronauts around my age, we're just going to look at you and say, Apollo. All about the moon landings. Generally, we can tell you exactly where we were for the first moon landing that we remember. And for me, it was Apollo 11. I was sitting in front of our black and white television at home with my mom, my older brother, and my older sister. And if you ask me what was it about watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon, I'm going to tell you, I don't know. I mean, to this day, I can't put it into words other than to say I was hooked. I was amazed, I was mesmerized, and I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And you might wonder, did I stop to think about the fact that I didn't see anybody who looked like me doing this and for real at NASA? Honestly, no, I didn't. And I've thought about that in my later years. And I've come to the conclusion that as I was watching NASA do these daring things in space for the first time, trying to send people to a place we'd never been before, I was also watching the original Star Trek. So I did see people who looked like me zipping through space on board a futuristic looking spacecraft. So I guess that really helped me picture myself doing this very same thing. I didn't think about it as a kid. I just was willing to dream the impossible dream. But as I got into my later years in high school, I still was possessed by the dream. And I had to think long and hard about what I should do, what path I should take to try and make this dream come true. And I followed my dad's advice and said, why don't you just research the backgrounds of people that NASA selected to be astronauts? Well, vast majority of them, well, all of them actually had gone to college. Many had studied science engineering. A lot had gone into the military and had learned how to fly. And so I just decided to follow family tradition and do what my mom's dad did and my dad. Both attended the Naval Academy. Both were Navy pilots. So as you heard, I ended up at the Naval Academy in the second class to have women. And yes, it was a very challenging transition. There were some of the male midshipmen, they were in the minority, but they were very vocal. They made it clear that they didn't think women belonged to that institution. So my mindset was to work hard and do the best that I could possibly do to prove that I felt I belonged there, like my grandfather and father had done to be there as well. One of the key lessons I learned when I was at the Naval Academy was that, trying to do anything, on your own is really, really hard. It just wears you down, particularly if you end up in a situation where you're in the minority for whatever reason. That wears on you. It just does. It saps your energy day in and day out trying to prove yourself because you feel like you need to prove yourself when you're in that situation. And the key lesson I learned was it is really important to find some sort of support system. For me, that happened to be the women's rowing team. It started in my very first year at the Naval Academy. In fact, I helped to start the crew team. But having some place to go after class, to be around people who were experiencing the same situations that I was going through day in and day out, who had an understanding of the challenges, who may have faced them already and come up with some good solutions, and they were willing to share that information. That was a game changer. That made life at the Naval Academy survivable. It made it doable. But whatever situation you find yourself in, either right now while you're in school, particularly later in life as you enter the workplace, find a support system. It doesn't mean that you're weak. Or, I don't like the narrative that we have here in the United States that you got to do it all on your own. That is a false narrative. You don't. You don't. You absolutely don't. So find that support system, tap into it, no matter where you're at, what you're going through. Find a group of people who can support you, can be your cheerleaders, who can walk alongside you. For me, that was one of the keys to me being able to make my dream come true. Well, I headed off to flight school after graduation. Ultimately, I wanted to fly helicopters. I just fell in love with them when I was a midshipman, the magic of being able to fly sideways and backwards. But again, I learned a very important lesson at flight school, which was, you're going to be in some situations where it is clear that the rules are not fair. The way things are being conducted is not necessarily fair. But if you're new to that situation, you don't really have the ability to change the rules at that point in time. I was in the minority again at flight school, one of just a few women who were going through flight training at that point in time. And was it fair that for me to be considered equal, I really had to be heads and shoulders above everybody else, my male colleagues in particular? No, that wasn't a fair situation, but that was the reality of the situation I was in. And again, I was too new to that situation to be able to change it at that moment in time. But what I could do was to be the best flight school student that I could possibly be. That every flight I could show up prepared, and more importantly, show that I was willing to be taught and I was willing to be learned. And if I had to change opinions, one instructor at a time, one of my fellow students at the time, so be it. That was going to be my approach. And eventually, perhaps things would improve. And they have greatly improved for the women going through flight training. I am happy to say that. Off I headed to my operational squadrons. And again, the magic of flying helicopters, really, really amazing. And more importantly, every time you flew a helicopter in the Navy, particularly when you're out at sea, you weren't training like the jet pilots were. You were doing your job. For me, it was flying helicopters in a logistics role. I've delivered a lot of people from ship to ship, along with food and cargo, and I have delivered more mail than all of my mail carriers will over the course of my lifetime. And I really like the fact that I was part of a team, 2 pilots, 2 aircrew personnel on board. That was great preparation for life as an astronaut, where together you had to plan your mission, you had to evaluate the potential risks of being able to accomplish your flight. You had to be prepared for what we called off-nominal or emergency situations. Everybody throwing out their ideas of how to handle that situation and then trying to figure out the best path forward. Again, I really enjoyed being part of that team and having that sense of teamwork, and together we're able to accomplish everything. But where I really wanted to be was being an astronaut. But because I had been a helicopter pilot, I had learned enough about the astronaut selection process to know that I couldn't be an astronaut pilot because I didn't fly jets. I was going to have to apply for this astronaut mission specialist category in the shuttle program. So that meant I really needed to find a way to go get my master's degree. And one day the Navy called me up and said, "Hey, we're starting this new program at MIT in Woods Hole, and we see that you've studied ocean engineering. And this new program is going to send 6 naval officers to MIT a year to study either oceanography or ocean engineering. So we need somebody with an ocean engineering background. So we were just wondering if you'd like to go to MIT in Woods Hole to get your master's degree." I'm like, yes, that would be great. That would be a wonderful step forward for me trying to become an astronaut. And the Navy said, apply. And if you get accepted, we'll send you to MIT and we'll pay your tuition. Oh, and oh, by the way, we'll keep paying your salary as well. Good deal. So I had to go take the GRE. That was a little tough to study for the GRE after being out of a classroom for about 4.5 years. I did do well enough to get accepted to MIT in the summer of 1986, after I'd been out of a classroom for about 5 years. Off I headed to MIT to study ocean engineering to get my master's. And the very first class I had to take was calculus for engineers. And I remember looking through the textbook, and it dawned on me that there were no numbers in this textbook. We were going to study things like imaginary numbers. And I thought to myself, it's imaginary, how am I really supposed to understand something that's imaginary? First test, really hard. And I do not come anywhere close to passing it. So, moment of truth. I really needed to get that master's degree if I was going to have a competitive astronaut application. But this was a rude awakening that, boy, doing that in MIT in Woods Hole was going to be really, really challenging. So, if I wanted to be an astronaut, I had to figure out a way to be successful. So I decided that I was going to become best friends with the teaching assistant for that calculus class. 5 days a week, probably 2 hours a day. I sat down with that young man. I'm like, teach me. I do not understand this, but I'm willing to spend as much time as you are willing to give me to try and understand this material. So back to what I said before about, you don't have to do it all on your own. Another very important lesson. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. That is not a sign of weakness. I'm saying that again. Personally, I think it's a sign of strength. It shows that at that moment in time, you realize enough about yourself that you're not able, that you don't know enough in this particular situation to be successful on your own. It also shows that you are motivated to get better. And you've got the determination and the drive to get better. So there is nothing wrong with being in that situation. In your life right now and in the future as well, there are going to be a lot of people around you who want to help you, who want to see you succeed. Do not hesitate to reach out to them. Well, I finished my master's. I got to go fly again. I put in my application to NASA, and lo and behold, I got selected, to my amazement, on the first application. And there you see a much younger version of myself in the astronaut candidate class of 1992. One step closer to being a full-fledged astronaut. Still had to go to astronaut school. That's okay. We got to design a patch so that made us feel like we were part of the program. And literally, nobody had been an astronaut before, so we had to go to school. And we started off by learning how to fly in the T-38 training jet. And for a helicopter pilot like myself, who had been low in flow for most of my flying career, the opportunity to go much, much higher and much, much faster was a heck of a lot of fun. But the real purpose of the T-38 was, to develop that teamwork. Fortunately, I'd already come from that world, having been a military pilot. And more importantly, to help us learn how to process information much, much faster, to sharpen our communication skills. T-38 typically flew around 550 miles per hour, but when you were going to be flying on board the space shuttle, you were, particularly when you're up on orbit, it's 17,500 miles an hour. Things happen at a much faster rate. You don't have a lot of time to make a decision in an emergency situation. You may, in fact, during liftoff, when we would blast off on board the space shuttle during that launch profile, there was a particular emergency that if it occurred, we only had 10 seconds to diagnose it, communicate with our crew members to all agree it was the problem, and then carry out our emergency procedures. So that ability to communicate very clearly, very concisely, a critically important skill. And again, that's something that we would practice in the T-38. We also had to learn all the systems on board the space shuttle. That probably was one of the hardest things as an astronaut candidate and as a full-fledged astronaut as well. The amount of information that you had to learn, that you had to understand, that you had to retain. My operations manual for the first helicopter I flew was about 2 inches thick. When you added up, when you stacked all the workbooks for the space shuttle for the particular systems on board, the individual systems, it was about 12 inches high. So again, processing all that information. We'd start off in what we called a single system trainer, learning one system at a time, basically a simulator for each system. We'd learn how to operate it, the procedures that you went through for normal operations, emergency procedure operations. Then when we learned all the systems, we went to the full up simulator where everything's integrated together. We practice those procedures again. You learned all that information. You would, hopefully you successfully completed your astronaut candidate flow. For me, back in the early 90s, when we were only learning the space shuttle, that took about 15 months to go through. Current astronaut candidates who are learning the space station, learning how to fly the robotic arm and do spacewalking, learning other languages, learning a couple of different vehicles that will take them up to space. Their training flow now is about 2 years long. I was very fortunate, and I entered in a period of time for NASA, particularly in the shuttle program, where the flight rate was pretty high. And for somebody like myself in that mission specialist category, we were flying a lot. I got assigned to my first mission even before I completed my astronaut candidate flow. And then you basically do it all over again. You keep learning the individual systems. You keep practicing all of them together in the full up simulator. But now you're doing it with your crewmates. You're practicing also the procedures that you're going to do for your particular mission, the objectives you have to accomplish. So simulator time, working side by side with our crew members, sitting in classroom with our instructors. Generally you're looking at 50, 60 hours a week going through your mission preparation flow. And then towards the end of your mission training flow, you did your water survival training. And as a Navy helicopter pilot, I thought, been there, done that. Only a couple different things for their space shuttle. Bailing out sometimes under a parachute. Sometimes after a hard landing, you might have to rappel down the side of the vehicle. But generally, I thought all this training was fun. But again, it signaled that you were almost done, that you were getting closer to launch. And what really drove it home too, that you were almost ready to launch, was climbing in that T-38 again, flying down to the Kennedy Space Center. Generally, we would do one lap around the launch pad to see our vehicle on the pad. Usually we spent about the last 4 days of our quarantine period down at the Kennedy Space Center, waiting for good weather, good vehicle. It was always fun to get up on launch day, have your the traditional crew breakfast, although my first launch, we launched at 1:30 in the morning, so hard to call it breakfast or dinner. Who knew what it really was? But you got dressed in those orange launch and entry suits about 4 hours prior to liftoff. You made your way to the silver Astrovan that drove you out to the launch pad. You climbed on board. You'd already practiced all this before at a practice countdown about 3 weeks prior, but on launch day, it's just different because now your vehicle's is full of fuel. That orange external tank had 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and they were venting out of the top, and it literally seemed like the vehicle was alive, and you were going to climb into the crew compartment, lie on your back for about 2.5 hours, going through the launch count, again, hoping that everything was going to work that day. The vehicle was going to cooperate, weather was going to cooperate. 7 seconds prior to liftoff, the main engines were commanded to light off. They came up to about 100%. You could begin to feel that a little bit. You could feel the vehicle sway. We called that twang. Solid rocket boosters on the side lit off, and boy, you felt that. You saw in that little insert that we start to bounce around in our seats. It's 6.5 million pounds of thrust, and generally 30 seconds after liftoff, you've already got 3 Gs. It's right through your chest. And I remember on my first launch thinking, oh my gosh, an elephant just sat down on me. I could not breathe. Incredibly heavy sensation on the chest, lots of pressure. Tried to put my arm out in front of me, way too hard. 3 Gs, that takes a lot of effort because it's sustained 3 Gs. Solid rocket boosters had about 2 minutes worth of fuel. They fell away. They were recovered by boats from the Kennedy Space Center, brought back to the center to be refurbished and reused on a later mission. Once we got rid of them, it became a comfortable environment until about the last minute and a half of flight. We were back at 3Gs. 8.5 minutes after liftoff, you get rid of the external tank. That was the only part of the shuttle that was not able to be reused again. I like to show this picture because it's very representative of the very first view I had out of the window of Orbiter Endeavour, my vehicle for my first flights. We had lifted off, as I said, about 1:30 in the morning. By the time we were up on orbit, it was daylight, where we were out over the Indian Ocean. And I remember looking out the window, seeing the sun glint on the water, seeing the curvature of the earth. And I realized, oh my gosh, I did it. I have made the dream come true. I am an astronaut. I just rode the rocket and I am up in space. And I thought, what an incredible experience. And I also thought to myself, if I don't get to look out the window again for the next 2.5 weeks that we're going to be up in space, that's okay. This one dream has made the 25 years of very hard work, of all those ups and downs, of all those moments of doubting whether or not I could make this dream come true. This one view has made it all worth it. Making a dream come true, there are no guarantees. It's not easy. I just told you it took me 25 years. And yeah, there were a lot of times where I didn't think it would be possible. But I have no regrets about starting down that path. And I will tell you this, you have no idea whether or not you can make the dream come true. You will not know that until you have the courage to take the very first steps necessary to start yourself down the path that may ultimately lead to that dream being fulfilled. You owe it to yourself to try. Because again, you have no idea how things are going to turn out. So have the courage to dream your dream and then be willing to follow it up with a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, as we say. And along the way, reach out for help. And I will also tell you, the journey itself is very enjoyable. I loved being a helicopter pilot in the Navy. If I didn't end up as an astronaut, I was perfectly content to stay in the Navy and continue to fly. I really, really enjoyed it. But you owe it to yourself to try. You don't want to get 10, 15 years down the road and look back and go, if only. You do not want to live a life where you're full of regret. So have the courage again to dream your dream and work your tail off to make it come true. Because I'll tell you right now, being an astronaut, it was far better than I ever thought it could be. It was an incredible experience to be able to live my dream. However, we are not up there true just to look out the window, solely to look out the window. We're up there to do a lot of work. For me, fortunately, on my first flight, we were a pure science mission. 16 days we were on orbit to operate telescopes. So that meant my job was to sit up on the flight deck and put maneuvers into the onboard computers. We literally split the crew into 2 shifts so we could operate 24 hours a day. So the shuttle commander and the shuttle pilot were on the opposite shift. Since I had been the flight engineer for launch and was going to be the flight engineer for landing, I, by default, became the on-orbit pilot for the second shift. So for a helicopter pilot, particularly somebody who's on her very first flight, this was a dream job. My job again was to sit up on the flight deck, often in the commander's seat, put those maneuvers into onboard computer, basically to put the orbiter in the correct position so we could then precisely point the telescopes. We were doing astronomy in the ultraviolet part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We were also trying to see if we could detect any helium that may have been left over from the Big Bang. In fact, one of the telescopes was able to detect that. So don't ask me any of the astronomy questions about this mission, because basically I was the bus driver. I was to make sure that we were in the right place at the right time. But again, heck of a lot of fun, basically to be up on the flight deck for almost 12 hours a day, looking out the window, watching this incredibly beautiful world go by. So after I finished that mission, myself, along with one of my astronaut classmates, Scott Pierzynski, we had heard about this new program that NASA was starting. Basically, President Clinton, when he was in office, invited Russia to participate in the International Space Station program. And as a way to get Russia used to working with NASA, they had done it before in the mid-70s with Apollo-Soyuz program, but to get ready for full-up operations for the International Space Station later in the decade, NASA was going to have astronauts go live on board the Russian space station Mir. So this new program was called the Shuttle Mir program. And we were looking for astronauts to participate in this program. So Scott and myself, we volunteered to be backup crew members. Scott goes off to Russia a few months before I do. He shows up and the Russians look at him and go, "Hey, nobody told us you were so tall, Scott." He said, "Yeah, I'm about 6'3". Well, they eventually put him in their crew transport vehicle, the Soyuz, and the measuring device for it, and they decided that Scott's too tall, cannot fly in Soyuz, would not be safe for him. He gets sent back to Houston with a new nickname called Too Tall. While all this has been going on, I've been going to Russian language class 5 days a week to get ready to go over to Russia to also train as a backup. But then the Russians send a memo to the chief of the astronaut office and say, "Hey, for your astronauts participating in the Shuttle Mir program, for them to be able to fly on Soyuz, also the emergency lifeboat while you're on board Mir, your emergency way home, you have to be 164 centimeters tall." Happens I'm 160 centimeters, right on the nose. So now I was known as too short, and Scott and I were known as the Russian rejects. But because I've been studying Russian language, the chief of the astronaut office came to me and said, "I still want to send you to Russia, but you're going to have a new job. You'll serve as the director of operations at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. Basically, you're going to be the chief astronaut babysitter, or the chief babysitter for the astronauts who are in training over there." So I showed up in Star City. This picture was taken in March of 1996, where I was going to start my 6-month stay as the DOR. Now, I was still on active duty in the Navy. Basically, I was on loan to NASA to be an astronaut. So, as somebody who had prepared to go to war against the Soviet Union during the first part of my Navy career during the Cold War, this really was somewhat of a bizarre situation to find myself in, because now there's no Soviet Union, the wall has fallen down. President Clinton has basically declared they're not your enemy anymore. They're partners in the International Space Station program. You astronauts working over in Russia, you go figure out how to truly make this into a partnership. Growing up, I'd watched films of Soviet troops and tanks rolling through Red Square. On some of our free time, I went to Red Square with another astronaut who was training as a backup crew member, Jim Voss. He'd been active duty in the Army Ranger. And I remember looking at Jim and I said, "Jim, when you were a second lieutenant, did you ever think you would be in Russia one day?" And he turned and looked at me with a very serious look on his face and he said, "Yeah, I did. But I figured I would be rolling into Moscow on top of my tank after we'd kicked their butts." So for Jim and myself, and for the other military astronauts who were participating in Shuttle Mir, this really was quite, again, a bizarre situation to find ourselves in. It's like our tasking, our mission has completely changed. But this is what we've been told to do. So we're going to salute smartly, and we're going to go figure out how to turn our enemies into friends. What we realized was, you know what? Generally, the Russian people are just like we are. All the stereotypes that we had heard, none of it was really correct. Yeah, there were significant differences in our political systems, but on a person to person level, we had so much more in common than we had differences. We had Russians working for us in the NASA office. They were mothers and fathers, they were grandfathers. Generally, they just wanted a better life for their family. We had astronauts over there as well with their family. Same goal. They wanted a better life for our kids. And so we decided that we were going to focus on that thing that we had in common. And we really did forge some very strong friendships, particularly amongst the astronauts and cosmonauts. Well, I won't go through in all the details of the story, but long story short, NASA added a couple of astronaut missions to Mir. Because I'd been over there as the DOR, the Russians finally measured me and they realized, oh, hey, you're not too short for Soyuz. So we'll let you do a long duration mission on Mir, but you have to be able to fit in our version of the spacewalking suit. I don't fit in their version of the spacewalking suit. It's so big on me that I can actually pull both arms out of the suit arm, scratch my nose with both hands. They'd never seen anybody be able to do this before. They thought it was funny, but it really was a serious situation. There was no way that I could do a spacewalk in that suit safely because it was so big on me. I literally could not get both of my hands down in the gloves of the suit at the same time. So, no way I could be on the outside of a spacecraft trying to do what we call hand over hand translation, grabbing a handrail. But the Russians gave me a waiver. They said, we know you want to do this flight. We'll let you do it. We'll let you start training for your flight to Mir. In fact, we'll let you do it, but you're on a waiver. You can only do this mission to Mir provided you're never in a situation where you have to do a spacewalk with one of your cosmonaut crewmates. Very fair. So I finished my DOR stint. I got to start training. Training in Russia was very unique. I'm not going to talk about all of it, but I will tell you that the survival training we had to do was incredibly authentic. I got to do winter survival training above the Arctic Circle in March. During the day, it was a balmy minus 30 degrees Celsius. At night, with the wind chill, it was minus 50 degrees Celsius. This had actually happened to a returning crew of cosmonauts early in the Russian program. They had landed during a blizzard. They had landed off course and they had to fend for themselves because for 24 hours, nobody could find them. So we practiced this. I learned how to build an igloo. And again, I have never been so cold in my life. Valuable training. I never actually wanted to have to put it to good use. So I continue with my training. Almost towards the end of my training flow, I have about 10 weeks left on the planet. The Russians conducted a test and they wanted to see, in preparation for International Space Station program, the cosmonaut commander on board Mir could manually fly the resupply vehicle into a docking at Mir. So he attempted to do that. The Progress resupply vehicle is approaching Mir. He's looking at the onboard video monitors. He's seeing it approach. And then suddenly he realizes, oh my gosh, Progress is coming in way too fast. I should mention that the Progress was not using its regular rendezvous radar system. Instead, they were just going to see if the cosmonaut commander could manually fly it in. Coming in way too fast, he frantically sends commands to get the Progress to fly around Mir. And it's too little too late. Progress collides with Mir. It hits the solar arrays attached to the Spectre module first. Close up of the damage. Bounces off the solar arrays, hits the radiator panel on the side of Spectre. Again, you see a close up of the damage. Actually put a hole in the Spectre module. So on board was NASA astronaut Mike Foale and his two cosmonaut crewmates. I was supposed to replace Mike at the end of his mission. So they feel these collisions. A few minutes later, they feel their ears pop. They realize they have a cabin leak. They're losing their very precious air to space. they instantly know they are in a very dangerous situation. They can't figure out where the leak's coming from. They have to abandon Mir. They need to get on board that Soyuz and come back to Earth. They finally figure out the leak is in Spectre. They were able to close the hatch to Spectre and seal off the leak. Unfortunately, when they did that, they had to sever cables that were bringing electricity from the Spectre solar arrays to the rest of Mir. Without the Spectre arrays, the rest of the arrays on Mir were not generating electricity to power all the systems on board. The key systems, like your life support system, your navigation and control system. So the crew's still not in a good situation. Mission Control Moscow knows they really need to recover the use of those arrays. So after about 3 weeks of studying this, they decide that the next 3 crew members going to Mir must be able to do a spacewalk. So that now means that I'm not going to Mir. I'm too short again, and my backup Dave Wolf was going to fly in my place. But thanks to the chief of the astronaut office, he let me stay on the shuttle flight that was going to take me to Mir and leave me there, STS-86. So definitely fun to be part of that crew. Since I had trained to do all the science experiments, I told Dave, don't worry, I'll set him up in the science module for you. This flight was also fun because first opportunity for me to be on a flight where we were doing a spacewalk. So I should mention that my fellow Russian reject, Scott Pierzynski, and I both ended up on this flight. So fun for the Russian rejects to fly together, and his first opportunity to go out and do a spacewalk. And he did it with the Russian cosmonaut we had as part of the crew, Vladimir Titov. I got to do one more flight to Mir thanks to the chief of the astronaut office, STS-91, and that was the last shuttle flight to Mir, and I think this picture was very fitting. We took it as we were backing away. Full moon and Mir illuminated by the sun as it was beginning to set and casting long shadows. So I got to do one more shuttle flight, this one also to a space station, but now up to the International Space Station. So this was really a dual purpose flight. We were going to go to the International Space Station, do some spacewalks to repair damaged equipment, to also add some equipment. But more importantly, this was the first flight after we had lost the orbital Columbia. So more importantly, this was a test flight. We were the first shuttle returned to flight mission. For most of our training flow, we didn't know exactly what we were going to do in response to the recommendations from the Accident Investigation Board. We had to create an ability to do onboard inspection. We also had to have the ability to do on-orbit repair of our vehicle. So that would eventually get figured out during the 2.5 years that it took for us to return to flight. First part of our training flow, we practiced the spacewalks we were going to do. For 20 years now, we've been using virtual reality to help us train for those spacewalks. So you can see one of my crewmates, Steve Robinson, with that VR helmet on his head. Inside, he's got a view of the station. So that shows him, as he moves his hands, how to move around and find that translation path. It also gave us an opportunity as arm operators and spacewalkers to figure out how we were going to talk to one another. We then used the full-up weightless training facility, basically the world's biggest swimming pool, the neutral buoyancy laboratory. That's really our most high-fidelity way of training for spacewalks. And again, the arm operators and the spacewalkers work pretty closely together. Definitely a lot of fun to be on a flight with spacewalks. A lot of preparation, though, for every spacewalk you're going to do. You'll probably practice it at least 7 times. So I'm going to zip through some of these quickly because I do want to make sure we have time for questions. One of the challenges we had was finding ways to repair material. Really, if you study any chemistry, this by far was the most challenging for engineers, finding a material that would work in the hot and cold of space as we orbit around the planet and the vacuum of space. Ultimately, this orange material didn't work, and instead we experimented with this gray material, which ended up working pretty well. Flew in all the remaining shuttle flights. Fortunately, never had to be used for a repair. So 2.5 years it took. We finally launched on Discovery. get up on orbit. Main objective for a mission, again, figuring out how to inspect the entire outside of the vehicle once we were up in space, this on-orbit inspection task. Flight day 2, we used the shuttle arm. Attached to it was an inspection boom with cameras. Really only let us see the leading edges of the wings, the side of the vehicle, and the nose cap area as well. We spent all of flight day 2 doing the inspection, didn't see any damage. It had been a hole in the wing that had brought down the orbiter Columbia, so not seeing any damage in the wings was a huge relief to the crew. But we had to figure out another way to do the rest of the vehicle, all the tiles on the underside. And so we took advantage of the profile we would use to basically rendezvous and dock with the station. And we had 2 crew members on board the station, so we knew that we could use them to take pictures of the underside. So on rendezvous day, literally we got 600 feet below the station. We put our vehicle into a backflip, meaning we were going to rotate around 360 degrees. Here's where the station crew members had to take pictures. And then we got back to the beginning and we went into the docking. But very cool to be the first crew to do this, because this is what we called our Star Wars moment. It was so cool to watch the space station rise up over the tail of our vehicle. But when you do things for the first time, invariably there's surprises. So when the engineers down in the control center in Houston inspected the pictures taken by the station crew of all the tiles on the underside, they saw 2 of these things called gap fillers sticking from between the tiles. Gap fillers were basically ceramic shims that were installed at the Kennedy Space Center, literally put in place to hold the tiles firmly in place as we went through all that vibrational launch. But lo and behold, you don't put enough glue on the bottom, you don't shove them all the way down to the skin of the spacecraft. That vibrational launch caused them to kind of shimmy their way up and stick up from in between the tiles. Engineers never knew that this could happen. Never seen this before. Didn't like it. Decided we had to pull 2 of these things out before we can come home. Delayed our 3rd spacewalk by a day. Here you can see us reviewing the new plan for the 3rd spacewalk, how we were going to fly an astronaut down to the underside of the spacecraft. I got to be the arm operator that day along with Jim Kelly. And here's Steve Robinson getting a free ride from me, going to where no astronaut had been before, the underside of the orbiter. And that's one of the 2 gap fillers he was able to pull out with his own fingers. So we were the only crew in the history of the shuttle program to do this. So we hadn't trained for it before flight, but we had been given a lot of great skills-based training. So pretty easy to carry out this plan, and really, really fun to be part of something that no shuttle crew had ever done before. But before you know it, it's time to come home. Space Shuttle Orbiter, incredibly capable vehicle. Reason why we can conduct the station, but not designed to stay in space continuously like the station. So before you knew it, you closed your payload bay doors and you literally were plummeting back to Earth on this 200,000-pound glider. Heads-up display provided flight information to the commander, specifically airspeed, your altitude readout. You also had a guidance cue. That's what you see in the center. That's basically pull up on the nose to slow down, flare to your landing speed. And before a shuttle commander landed for the first time, he or she would have well over 1,000 practice approaches in the shuttle training aircraft. Even though they were skilled military test pilots, landing a glider at a high speed, not an easy thing to do. Nice picture of our good ship Discovery. We ended up out in Edwards Air Force Base because August in Florida, full of thunderstorms, not compatible with the spacecraft, and the crew of STS-114 after our 14 days in space. We went around the planet 219 times, traveled roughly 5.8 million miles, and truly a privilege and honor to be on this crew and play a role in returning the space shuttle program to flight. But again, another very important lesson I learned both in my military career as a pilot and in my life as an astronaut. It's really all about the team. It's not one individual on the team. It's about all of us working together. Everybody brings their best to the table. They bring a lot of different skills, a lot of different experiences. Here you get to see a picture of our flight control team after our successful mission. Without them, we astronauts who are up in the vehicle, the ones who end up on television, the people who are visible, we never would have been successful. They were really the heart and soul of the program. And this was truly a privilege and honor to be part of their team. So with that, it went a little longer than I had hoped. I apologize for that, but I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you all in case you've got any questions that you would like to answer, have me answer.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences. That was an amazing story. So now, anyone, if you have questions, feel free to turn your video on and unmute yourself and ask Captain Lawrence, or if you'd prefer to put it in the chat, we can read the question out to her as well. Take it away.
You know, it's never fun to be the first one.
Okay, Wendy, I'll go first just to break the ice here. First of all, if I could give you a standing ovation on Zoom, I would. Thank you so much. So it seems like a lot of your success came from your attitude. You talked a lot about being prepared, asking questions, working as a team, that type of thing. Could you just speak to a little bit more about that and how that really saw you through so many different stages in your career?
I think part of it is I was fortunate in that I had a clear idea what I wanted to do. So having that vision, having that in mind, I think helped it. I mean, I had a vision of where I wanted to end up. And so that was helpful in staying motivated because I had an understanding of generally what direction in which I needed to head. So for me, that made it a little bit easier, and perhaps it tended to be more of a straight shot. But back to my comment about the journey, I generally was enjoying what I was doing. I mean, like I said, I loved being a pilot. I loved being part of the team. So that I found myself in situations where I generally was getting up in the morning and I was looking forward to what I was going to be able to do that day. And if you can get yourself in that sort of situation, for the most part, generally most days of the week, I think that helps to keep you motivated. It helps to keep you in a better frame of mind. It helps to keep you energized. Now, you also heard me say that there were periods where, I wasn't having a lot of fun. But you have to step back and have some perspective. And yeah, when you're in your 20s, that's a little harder to do. Now that, I'm in my 60s, you can have that perspective that this period where it's tough, it's not going to last forever. It's not going to be the majority of your life. It is a period in which you need to just figure out how to gut it out and continue to move forward. You will get through it, particularly if you're surrounding yourself with people who want to help you get through it. But step back and have that perspective that this is just a period in which you've got to endure. You will make it through to the other side and things will look up. So my advice is figure out how to have that persistence and figure out how to develop that perseverance, because both of those will help you make it through those tough periods of time. And I will also add, it's okay to step back and it's okay to have fun. Think of that as re-energizing yourself. You do not, even though I was working towards a dream, I didn't let it possess me to the point where I was doing it 24 hours a day. You've got to have some balance in your life. For me, I love exercising. I was a I was a rower, and then I was a runner. So I did a lot of running races when I was in the Navy. I ran marathons, but you've got to find another outlet, a way for you to kind of unplug, and also simultaneously recharge. Go cultivate some interests outside of whatever you're focused on right now, being a student, master's, PhD, undergrad, but find outlets in where you can have some fun. And that's a way that you're going to recharge and stay motivated to keep moving forward.
All right, yes, we have a question. Who's raising their hand? Please come on camera. Feel free.
I, hi, Wendy. Thank you for telling us your story. It's quite inspiring. And I'm in the library, so I can show my video right now, so it's fine. As like my story is kind of similar right now with the situation. Like I'm just completed my master's, and I'm actively applying for jobs, and I'm getting every day good amount of rejections. So how do you keep yourself up? Like you wake up, like you said, you wake up every day and you feel like giving up. So how do you keep yourself like motivated, like you will get it one day?
You're in a tough situation right now. I mean, look, and I can't comment on it because, I went right graduation, I was commissioned, I went right into a job. But um, try and find yourself a support system. I'm sure you know people who are the same point in life right now, applying for a job. Get together, compare notes, share ideas. They're going to be part of your network. Tap into their network as well. Maybe they have some contacts that you could pursue, but don't try and do it all on your own. So find some people to help you as you apply. See if there are already some professional societies that are related to your degree program that you can join and meet people in the workplace. I know as somebody who's been in the aerospace business, AIAA is a tremendous resource, particularly for college students right now. You can join, you get a discount for joining, and you immediately have access to people who are out in the workplace. And you can, and I've seen it in their version of chat, so to speak, where people who are in college are asking for advice about internships, about job applications, about contacts. So I would say try and find some sort of organization like that you could take advantage of right now and see if find people in the workplace who can look at your resume, help you expand your contacts that you have into the job field that you're applying for.
So just like a curiosity, like what kind of changes your body gone through all this process? Because I heard you increase your height.
So, that's something that we're learning a great deal about from the space station astronauts. In general, microgravity for an extended period of time is not good for the human body. The longer we have people up there, the more we're learning. Radiation exposure, not only does it lead to cancer, there are indications that it causes, may lead to Alzheimer's. Certainly there's bone loss. Without exercise, we would see astronauts developing osteoporosis. The exercise protocol right now is working very well. There's some cardiovascular changes. Fortunately, those don't seem to be permanent. Eyesight changes, it kind of depends on the person. About 70% of astronauts experience eyesight changes. They tend to become more farsighted. A handful have had permanent vision changes after landing. So generally, with an adequate recovery time, they'll get back to your level of health you had before your mission. But that's not always the case. The radiation one, however, is a big question because we can't really answer that until current groups of astronauts literally get into their 60s and 70s. We're looking for incidence of cancer later in life. So that one right now, I think, is the most significant concern, particularly as we're looking at sending people back to the moon and on to Mars. The radiation question has not been answered. and we don't have good methods right now of doing that sort of research with humans here on the ground. Because we don't understand the biological impact of space-based radiation, we really can't construct human-based research here on Earth and have it be medically ethical.
Thank you so much.
Can take one or two more questions. Yes, I see a hand.
Hello. Hello. This was a wonderful talk. I really appreciate you presenting. This was really cool to get to hear about. And something I'm wondering about is it sounds like from a lot of your missions and the things that you've spoken about that it involves a lot of like trusting people, like trusting your colleagues, trusting the people back at NASA that are constructing these missions. And I'm curious kind of how you manage to like keep that trust up. I know there might have been like obstacles to that, like I could imagine maybe like post Columbia and things like that, that there might be like challenges. And I'm curious kind of how you manage that.
Well, the trust aspect is critical. And, fortunately, as a crew, you spend a lot of time together. So you're training for a year and a half together. Station crew members may be 2.5 years. So you have a lot of time to get to know each other, to get to know not only the person in a workplace setting, but outside of that, to meet their family, to learn their strengths and weaknesses, and they learn your strengths and weaknesses. So spending time with a person, I think, is critically important for developing that level of trust. For us, this is the first return to flight mission. I have to give Wayne Hale a lot of credit. He was the shuttle program manager at the time, and he felt it was very, very important for our crew to have a direct line of communication with him. And typically once a month we went to his office, he closed the door, he was there with the deputy program manager, and he said, okay, I want to know honestly how you are feeling about things. So that open, honest communication also was critically important for developing that trust. And then Eileen Collins was our commander, and I think she did a superb job. She made a point of us getting around to visit the different groups who were part of the return to flight effort. We went to the various centers. We went over to Marshall Space Flight Center, for example. They were responsible for the external tank rework. We met with them regularly. We went down to Kennedy Space Center. We went with various groups of the Johnson Space Center. So we really tried to facilitate that open, honest communication and get a chance to meet people. They got to meet us, we got to meet them. Having that personal interaction, I think, also was critically important for building that trust.
Thank you so much.
Ruth, did you see the question from Meg in the chat? You see that? I can read it if you'd like. I got it. So this is a question from Meg Caron, Wendy. The question is, should you orient yourself to the pursuit of one life dream, or can you pursue various lifelong dreams along the way? What do you advise if you can envision yourself in 3 different careers and enjoying all of them?
Well, I think that is up for each person to decide how they want to do that. I think you have to step back and say, all right, can I pursue these things in parallel? And there are the paths that I need to take, are they generally going to head in the same direction, or is there one of these that's really going to pull me away from the other one or two? So that, not knowing specifically what it is that you're trying to pursue, that's you're going to have to figure out. But I think generally you got to try and keep yourself moving in the direction of trying to make these things happen. Doesn't have to be straight line. There are a lot of astronauts that tell you stories that kind of meandered here, but generally I was moving forward. So I think that's something that you're going to have to figure out as you start down your journey, is whether or not you can. Generally, these You can head in a direction where you can keep all of these dreams alive, or are you going to reach a point where you're going to have to break off? One's going to have to break off from the others.
Makes this wonderful. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone have a question for Wendy before we let her go?
I guess I have a question. Why do you think human space exploration is important? How can that benefit society, especially human space exploration versus robotic space missions?
Yes, any space exploration is pushing the boundaries, and to do it successfully, you've got to, we've had to develop new technologies. I like to use this example from the Apollo program. To make the Apollo moon landing successful, we needed to develop the ability to for computers to share information, and IBM was at the heart of this solution. Well, then you get people who go, oh, computers can share information. That means I could do this and that with them. And so your ability to go to an ATM and withdraw money is based on computers' ability to talk to one another. So invariably, when we're trying to do this hard stuff, and it doesn't have to be space exploration, but when we're trying to push the boundaries of what we're able to do, that typically involves creating a new way to do something, which then in the world of NASA, we call a spinoff, because somebody on the outside realizes I could utilize that technology in the area in which I'm working. And then that will benefit me. And the role of government generally is to take, particularly if you're an agency like NASA, is to help develop a new technology, to work with contractors to give them, and universities to give them the money to figure out whether or not it's feasible, to get it to a particular point where then you can make it more widely available so that the general public can use it. And that all starts with somebody asking a tough question and figuring out if there's a way to answer it, and then trying to, whatever the answer is, make the answer a reality. So when we push the boundaries, no matter what it is, in general, we have smart people coming from a wide variety of backgrounds who can look at it and come up with a solution, and then make that solution available for the rest of society to benefit from.
Fantastic. Seems like a great way to close us out here. Wendy, thank you again. Really, this was really wonderful. And we appreciate your time. And thank you. Really, thank you again. Anyone else?
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. And you all got a break from your homework, so sorry, it's over.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank
Take
you
care,
for
everyone.
attending.
Thank
And good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.